When you join the world of gangs, there are only three roads open to you: to hospital, to jail, or to death.
2002. Brenda P became a rat and leaked secrets of the notorious MS-13 gang to the FBI. While she thought she'd never be caught, P didn't know how wrong she was. Here are some Americans who messed with the wrong gangs.
And then all of a sudden, man, it's like being on a military firing range where somebody says, "Commence fire," and it's just pow, 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 pow from every direction.
September 23, 1989, a fierce gun battle erupts on the streets of Tacoma, Washington, marking one of the most intense civilian-military confrontations in American history. At the center of the conflict was Staff Sergeant William Bill Folk, a member of the U.S. Army's elite 2nd Rangers Battalion, who unknowingly found himself at war with a violent street gang. What began as an effort to clean up his neighborhood quickly escalated into a deadly standoff that left a lasting impact on the city. In 1987, Bill Folk purchased a rundown house on Ash Street in the Hilltop neighborhood of Tacoma for just $10,000. A determined soldier with over a decade of military experience, he saw potential in the property and believed that the area, despite its crime-ridden reputation, could be redeemed. However, his plans clashed with a darker reality, as the house across the street was a known drug den, allegedly run by members of the Crips, a notorious street gang that had expanded its drug trade from California into Washington. By 1989, gang violence and drug-related crime in Tacoma had increased, making Hilltop one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the state. Folk, along with some of his neighbors, grew frustrated by the lack of police action. He began documenting the illegal activity taking place in his neighborhood, using a video camera positioned in his upstairs window to capture the constant flow of drug deals happening across the street.
And taking pictures of the drug dealers, but then he started taking pictures of all the gang members that were moving in and all the guns.
His surveillance efforts didn't go unnoticed, and tensions between him and the gang members escalated. On September 21, 1989, a local newspaper, the News Tribune, published an article talking about the growing unrest on Ash Street, describing Folk and his neighbors as being on the verge of vigilante action. While the coverage momentarily slowed drug activity in the area, it also angered the gang members, who saw Folk as a direct challenge to their control of the neighborhood. The situation reached its boiling point just 2 days later. On the evening of September 23rd, Folk decided to host a neighborhood barbecue as a show of unity against crime. A few of his fellow Army Rangers from Fort Lewis joined him, bringing their personal firearms in case of trouble. As the party unfolded, gang members across the street began throwing rocks and rotten fruit at Folk's house, aiming at the video camera he had set up. The harassment quickly escalated when one of them fired a BB gun at his home. In response, Folk and a few Rangers crossed the street to confront the group, demanding that they stop. The gang members in turn accused Folk of provoking them and allegedly issued a death threat. Realizing the situation was getting out of hand, Folk made a quick call to his base.
"I'm about to come under attack at my house, and I need every available Ranger now."
Within minutes, a dozen Rangers arrive at his house, armed with their own handguns, shotguns, and rifles. The soldiers, trained for combat, began setting up defensive positions around the property, preparing for what seemed like this inevitable attack. At 9:20 p.m., the gunfight began. With both sides blaming each other later for firing the first shot, within moments, bullets were flying across the street. The Crips, using parked cars and nearby structures for cover, fired at Folk's house, while the Rangers returned fire from inside and around the property. Witnesses later described the scene as a full-scale battle, with an estimated 100 to 300 rounds exchanged in a matter of minutes. The police, unprepared for such an intense firefight, initially hesitated to intervene. The first officers on scene found themselves pinned down by the gunfire. Realizing the severity of this, they briefly withdrew before regrouping and moving in with greater force. As soon as law enforcement established its presence, the gang members had scattered, fleeing into the night. 2 suspects were arrested, though only one ultimately was charged with second-degree assault. Surprisingly, after all that fighting, no official injuries were reported that night. However, years later, Folk claimed that at least one of the gang members had been wounded, but managed to escape before police arrived. He also said that the Rangers shot many people who fled the scene rather than waiting for emergency medical services. In the immediate aftermath, authorities confiscated some of the Rangers' weapons as evidence, but later returned it after determining they'd been used in self-defense. The shootout brought national attention to the crime problem in Tacoma and forced city officials to reevaluate their approach to policing. The Tacoma PD, which had long been criticized for its reluctance to respond to crimes unless witnessed firsthand, shifted toward a more community-oriented policing model, increasing its patrols, neighborhood watch groups, and even proactive law enforcement strategies would soon follow. Folk, however, paid a personal price for his actions. While his superiors in the Army supported his right to defend himself, they also disapproved of his decision to involve other Rangers in a civilian conflict. And as a result, he was denied a promotion, and fellow soldiers were discouraged from visiting his house. Despite that, he remained in the Army for a few more years, even serving in the U.S. invasion of Panama later that same year. But decades later, the impact of the Hilltop shootout is still evident. The once dangerous neighborhood of Ash Street undergone significant transformation, with the crime rates dropping and property values soaring. And as of 2022, Folk still lives in that same house, having repaired all but one of the bullet holes as a reminder of the night he and his fellow Rangers faced off against one of Tacoma's most feared gangs.
A mother hit and killed by a car while she was at a memorial for her teenage daughter, a young woman who was murdered by members of the notorious MS-13 gang.
Kayla Quas was a high school student living in her hometown of Brentwood, New York, a suburban community on Long Island. Now, she was known for being outspoken and confident, but her assertiveness put her on the radar of some dangerous criminal organizations. 2016, Kayla gets into fights with members of MS-13 gangs at school, and even speaks out against them on social media. The confrontations escalated over time, drawing attention from a gang known for extreme brutality and a total intolerance for disrespect. Kayla's clashes with MS-13 made her a target, and the gang soon decided to retaliate in the most violent way possible. September 13th, 2016, Kayla was walking through her neighborhood with her best friend, Nisa Mickens. As the two girls made their way through the streets of Brentwood, they had no idea that several MS-13 members were driving around, searching for rivals to attack. When the gang spotted Kayla, they recognized her as someone who had argued with them before. At that moment, they see a perfect opportunity to teach her a lesson. The gang jumps out of their car and chases down the two girls. Kayla and Nisa try to run, but they were quickly caught. The gang then attacks them using baseball bats and a machete, showing no mercy. The assault was brutal, leaving both these girls with horrific injuries. Now later that night, Nisa's body was found on the side of the road. Kayla's body was discovered the next day, not far from where her friend had been killed. The murder shocked the community, exposing the growing problem of gang violence in the area. Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13, is one of the most violent gangs in the world. They came out of Los Angeles in the 1980s but quickly expanded to Central America, particularly El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Over time, they would develop a reputation for extreme brutality with machetes, firearms, and other weapons to enforce their rule and eliminate their enemies. These guys would also get involved in alien smuggling, weapons trafficking, assault, homicide, rape, kidnapping, identification theft, home invasions, carjackings, prostitution, robbery, and vandalism. Let's not forget to mention that the gang has a strict code of conduct though, and any perceived disrespect can result in deadly consequences. This was the case with Kayla Quas. Her arguments with MS-13 at school were seen as a challenge to the gang's authority, something they just couldn't tolerate. In the eyes of MS-13, retaliation is necessary, and their response was swift and ruthless. The murder of Kayla and Nisa wasn't just about revenge. These two were meant as a warning to others. You see, MS-13's influence on Long Island had been growing for years. Before the murders of Kayla and Nisa, The gang was responsible for numerous killings, often targeting young people they believed to be rivals or some kind of threat. In fact, authorities later discovered the bodies of other missing teenagers in the wooded areas around Brentwood. The killing sparked outrage amongst parents and local officials, who would accuse the authorities of not doing enough to protect their children. Now, the killings had led to increased efforts to combat gang violence on Long Island. Authorities intensified their crackdowns on MS-13, arresting several gang members connected to the murders. Among them would be Enrique Portillo, a 26-year-old MS-13 member who played a direct role in the attack. August 31st, 2023, Portillo pled guilty to his involvement in the murders of Kayla and Nisa, as well as 2 other killings. He admitted to using a baseball bat in one attack and acting as a lookout while another gang member was executed. His guilty plea was a significant step toward justice, but it did little to ease the pain felt by the victims' families. In the years following Kayla's murder, her mother, Evelyn Rodriguez, devastated by her daughter's death, became an outspoken activist against MS-13 and criticized local authorities for failing to prevent the violence.
It's hard every day, but with the Lord's strength and Kayla, that's where I get it from.
She worked tirelessly to raise awareness about MS-13 and to push for stronger measures to protect young people from gang recruitment and attacks. Rodriguez also argued that the school district ignored the warnings that Kayla was being threatened by gang members, and she would later file a $110 million lawsuit against the Brentwood School District, claiming that they failed to protect her daughter. Her activism gained national attention, and in 2018, Rodriguez spoke before Congress, attending President Trump's State of the Union address, and worked closely with law enforcement to fight gang violence. But then, this wasn't the end of the tragedy for the family. September 14th, 2018, exactly 2 years after Kayla's body was found, Evelyn was visiting the site of her daughter's memorial in Brentwood. She was involved in a dispute with a neighbor over the placement of the memorial when the argument turned deadly. A woman driving an SUV accelerated forward, striking Evelyn, and she was rushed to the hospital, but didn't survive. The circumstances surrounding her death were initially unclear. Given her high-profile activism against MS-13, some speculated that her death could have been a targeted act of retaliation. However, law enforcement says there's no direct evidence linking this to gang violence. The driver, whose name is Anne-Marie Drago, was later found guilty of running over Rodriguez. Rodriguez's death was yet just another devastating blow to her family and to the Brentwood community. This person dedicated her life to seeking justice for her daughter, and now she too was gone. Her passing raised further concerns about the dangers that activists and outspoken individuals face when confronting violent criminal organizations like MS-13.
Look at all the stuff that I've done through my life for this stupid gang. It's just 2 letters and it doesn't mean anything. You start thinking about that, your conscience starts working, you start feeling bad about stuff. That's when you become a rat.
When you join the world of gangs, there are only 3 roads open to you: to hospital, to jail, or to...
June 2003. Brenda P was invited by a group of friends to go fishing. Now, little did she know, this was a setup by MS-13 to get back at her for snitching on him. 16-year-old Brenda P was brutally murdered by this same gang she once considered family. She grew up on the streets of LA, where she became involved with Mara Salvatrucha. Brenda, like many others, were drawn into the gang's dangerous world at a young age. Now, despite being deeply involved with MS-13, Brenda eventually had a change of heart and had left the gang. In the fall of 2002, she started cooperating with law enforcement, providing critical information about the gang's structure, crimes, and leadership. She becomes a federal informant, working with detectives across at least 6 states to help bring down MS-13 members. Brenda was even scheduled to testify in several murder trials, including one against Dennis Rivera, a high-ranking MS-13 member accused of killing a rival gang member. Her decision to turn on MS-13 put a big target on her back. Now, in this effort to protect her, the feds throw her in witness protection. However, she struggles with isolation and loneliness. She ended up missing the only life she ever knew and continued to communicate with MS-13 members, believing she could maintain friendships without consequences. That was a fatal mistake. July 13, 2003, the gang's retaliation came mercilessly. Brenda, who was 4 months pregnant, was lured to the banks of the Shenandoah River in Virginia under the pretense of a fishing trip. There, she was ambushed by 3 MS-13 members, Oscar Antonio Grande, Ismael Juarez Cisneros, and Oscar Garcia Orellana. They restrained her, placed a rope around her neck, and stabbed her 16 times in a calculated design to send a message. The gang found out about her cooperating with law enforcement after discovering her diary, which contained police business cards and notes detailing her conversations with investigators. Brenda's body was found 4 days later by a fisherman and his son. Her brutal death served as a warning to others who might consider betraying MS-13. The gang had made it clear, witnesses must die. Defense attorneys had argued that many people had wanted Brenda dead and questioned why the government didn't do more to protect her. They also pointed out that she was never officially placed in federal witness protection. They would go further and point out that there was a list of 13 people considered a threat to Brenda, and Dennis Rivera was only number 10 on that list, suggesting that others could have been responsible for her murder. Authorities, however, claimed that Brenda had returned to MS-13 voluntarily, despite being offered protection by authorities. They argued that she wasn't targeted because of her cooperation, but because she had maintained relationships with gang members. The legal consequences for Brenda's killers were severe. A federal jury in Alexandria, Virginia, found Oscar Antonio Grande and Ismael Juarez Cisneros guilty on all charges, including murder conspiracy and retaliation against a witness. They faced either the death penalty or life in prison. However, the verdict wasn't as clear-cut for the other 2 defendants. Dennis Rivera, whom prosecutors identified as the mastermind of the murder, was acquitted on all counts, though he remained in prison serving a life sentence for a different murder. Interestingly, Rivera was suspected to have given the green light for Brenda's murder, meaning he authorized the killing from his jail cell. Now, the 4th defendant, Oscar Garcia Orellana, was also acquitted. The trial was part of this larger effort by the federal and local authorities to crack down on MS-13's growing influence in the U.S. Law enforcement responded by intensifying their efforts to dismantle MS-13, launching their nationwide crackdown.
After all these years, the Reverend Al Sharpton admits he was an FBI informant.
April 7th, 2014. A news publication revealed that Al Sharpton, who had connections to the powerful Genovese and Gambino crime families, was an FBI informant. So the Mafia puts out a hit on Sharpton, which leaves him running for his life. Born October 3rd, 1954 in Brooklyn, New York, Alfred Charles Sharpton Jr. was raised in the Brownsville neighborhood by his parents, Ada Richards and Alfred Charles Sharpton Sr. And from a young age, he would show interest in preaching and give his first sermon at just 4 years old. As a child, he would tour with renowned gospel singer Mahalia Jackson. Over the years, he became a well-known civil rights activist, minister, and political figure. But before his rise to national prominence, he found himself entangled in a dangerous world that would later put his life at risk. You see, during the 1980s, Sharpton had become involved with powerful crime families in New York, which included the Genovese and Gambino organizations. He was already under investigation for links to organized crime when he attempted to extort money from the Jackson family during their Victory Tour. Shortly after this failed operation, he gets a phone call from an unknown man named S, who threatens to kill him. Realizing the danger he's in, Sharpton makes a life-changing decision. He turned to the FBI for protection and struck a deal. In exchange for his safety and freedom, he agreed to become a CI for the feds. Sharpton was given the code name CI-7 in FBI documents, and he began working closely with the feds gathering intel on organized crime figures. According to reports, he carried a specially designed briefcase equipped with a recording device and secretly taped conversations with high-ranking members of the Genovese and Gambino families. Over the course of his informant work, it's said that he made at least 10 undercover recordings of a Gambino crime family member. His cooperation contributed to multiple indictments and arrests of key mafia figures. But his work with the FBI wasn't limited to only organized crime and mobsters. He was also secretly taping discussions with black activists involved in underground movements. FBI reports suggest that Sharpton provided info about militants associated with Joanne Chesmard, also known as Assata Shakur. Some activists, including Ahmed Obafemi, later stated that they'd long suspected him of gathering intel for the government. However, Sharpton denies many of these claims and disputes parts of the allegations against him. April 7, 2014, The Smoking Gun publishes a report showing FBI documents that confirmed Sharpton's role as an informant. The report detailed how he recorded conversations that directly contributed to the prosecution of several mobsters. This revelation would shock many, causing intense debate about his past. Some saw this guy as a hero for aiding law enforcement and taking down dangerous criminals, while others questioned his motivations and the extent of his involvement with both the mafia and federal agents. When the truth finally came out, Sharpton became a marked man. By exposing the dirty work, Sharpton made some powerful enemies. His decision to work with the FBI offered little protection, but it would put his life at risk, and he remained active in the public eye, using his growing influence to shift focus toward civil rights and political activism. So despite the controversy, Sharpton continued to build his career. He became a well-known figure in American politics and activism, founding the National Action Network, a civil rights organization. 2004, he would run for a Democratic nomination for the U.S. presidential election, further solidifying his role as a national political figure. He would become a television and radio host, using his platform to discuss social justice and advocate for change. Today, Sharpton's recognized as one of the most prominent civil rights activists in the U.S. He's the host of the nationally syndicated radio show Keeping It Real, and even appears as a political analyst and host on MSNBC's Politics Nation. His past as an FBI informant does remain a controversial chapter in his life, but it didn't stop him from becoming one of the most influential voices in American activism.
She was killed in the Woodlawn neighborhood in a shooting, and she was shot multiple times, and so the police thought that she was targeted.
Jakira Barnes was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where gang violence was a part of her daily life. And from an early age, she would get involved in street activity. But by her teenage years, she earned a reputation that few girls ever had. Unlike most young women associated with gangs, Barnes wasn't just a bystander or someone who just hid weapons for others. She was believed to be a shooter, a hitter for her faction, the Gangster Disciples. In fact, cops suspected her of being involved in multiple shootings, possibly even as many as 15. In 2010, Barnes went into Perspective's IIT Math and Science Academy as an 8th grader. At the time, she was described as shy and quiet, not really someone destined for a violent life. However, by her freshman year, her attendance became inconsistent and eventually she dropped out after becoming involved in the juvie justice system. In 2011, when she was just 14 years old, Barnes was charged with firing a weapon, though no one was injured, and the case was dismissed after witnesses changed their testimonies. And over the next few years, Barnes would become more involved in gang activity, spending a little more time on the streets and gaining a feared reputation. On social media, Barnes was also openly taunting rivals and would speak about violence. She went by the name K.I. and later Lil Snoop, a nickname inspired by a female shooter in the TV crime drama The Wire. Many feared her, and some even mistook her for a boy due to her tough demeanor. One of the shootings Barnes is suspected of being involved with is the killing of O.D. Perry, a Black Disciples member, which was a rival to the Gangster Disciples. If she was involved in that, it would have been in retaliation for the death of Shondale Tuka Gregory, her close friend who was killed earlier that year. You see, Barnes' involvement in gang violence made her a prime target for rival gangs. And she continued to publicly call out her enemies and even post on Twitter about how she knew people were trying to kill her. On On March 29, 2014, a Chicago police officer shot and killed one of her friends after he allegedly pointed a gun. And when she heard of this incident, Barnes responded with a threatening tweet, saying that she'd kill officers faster than rival gang members. The day of reckoning was on the horizon. April 11th, 2014. Barnes was walking near 64th Street and Eberhard Avenue when a hooded gunman opens fire. She shot 7 times in broad daylight, suffering fatal wounds to her chest, jaw, and neck. The 2 young men with her were also injured, but it was clear that she was the primary target. Investigators later determined that the shooting was a planned retaliation by a rival gang. Her murder was just a piece of an ongoing war between the gangster disciples and the black disciples, which had already taken the lives of many young people in the area. Some police say that even her own gang may have wanted her gone because of how much attention she was drawing in. Her reputation as a feared shooter had made her a liability, and in the world of gang violence, really no one was untouchable. Despite police suspicions, though, no one was ever arrested or charged in connection with Barnes' murder. The nature of gang violence also made it difficult for investigators to gather enough evidence, as witnesses were unwilling to come forward. In this case, street justice rules, and retaliation often comes in the form of more shootings rather than some legal consequences. Though she was feared on the streets, those who knew Barnes before she became involved in gang life remembered her differently. Teachers at school were really shocked when they learned about her alleged role in gang violence. Her mother, Chantel Brown, struggled to accept the possibility that her daughter had been involved in so many shootings. Although she'd seen videos of her daughter wearing a bandana and waving a gun, she never saw any weapons in their home. To this day, she doesn't know whether Barnes was truly a killer or if she'd simply been trying to survive in a dangerous world.
I love her, and I'm gonna fight for her to have justice, because I don't think it's fair that we're losing our kids being gunned down every day in the streets.
The cycle of violence doesn't end with Barnes' death. In the months and years that followed, shootings would continue between rival factions, with more lives being lost in this ongoing war. The murder of Jakira Barnes became just another chapter in this tragic story of gang violence in Chicago, where young people are caught in a deadly cycle of revenge with gangs that are not to be messed with.